Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast. Happy sites, happy patients, and happy sponsors. Eliminate the site burden of drug sourcing while improving patient recruitment. I'm Lisa Henderson, the Group Editorial Director of Applied Clinical Trials, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are pleased to bring you this webcast presented by Applied Clinical Trials and sponsored by Myonexx. And I would now like to share a statement from our sponsor. Myonexx is a leading global clinical trial supply company offering integrated services and solutions tailored to meet each trial's specific requirements and complexities. Myonexx partners with pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies, CROs, and other service providers seeking flexible, comprehensive solutions from sourcing to direct-to-patient or DTP. We have a few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit those questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of the video player. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small icon in the bottom right corner of the media player, and your slides will advance automatically during the event. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark help widget in the top right of your presentation window. I would now like to introduce today's speakers. We are pleased to be joined today by Samit Bhatt, Tom Gregson, Todd Luckritz, and Mary Vizet. Samit manages Myonexx's growing clinical trial patient solutions in North America and Europe. He brings over 12 years' experience in managing successful formulary status and relationship management with payers, significant understanding of healthcare contracts, and knowledge of medical and pharmacy benefits, including specialized knowledge across different therapeutic areas. Samit holds both a Doctor of Pharmacy degree and an MBA from Drake University. Tom, Senior Director of Global Business Development, has been with Myonexx for 9 years and is responsible for their large pharma global accounts, as well as management of Myonexx's European-based business development team. Todd, Associate Director of Patient Solutions, Myonexx, worked for over 21 years at the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona. For the last 7 years, he was the lead pharmacist for the Investigational Drug Services Pharmacy team, which managed a diverse portfolio of clinical trials from all therapeutic areas. Todd recently joined the Myonexx team this year. And Mary is a CPA and seasoned clinical research finance expert with over 20 years of experience serving as the interface between principal investigators, clinical operations, and executive leaders in order to drive clinical research program initiatives. She has been an innovative healthcare leader and brings extensive experience in financial program management, financial modeling, and business plan development within the clinical trial space. So thank you all for joining us today. And Tom, could you please get us started?
Thank you very much, Lisa. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. This is Tom Gregson. I am Senior Director of Global Business Development for Myonexx. So firstly, on behalf of our panel today and the wider Myonexx team, thanks to the many of you who have joined today's webcast. A webcast that will discuss the challenges that sites face when asked to provide commercial drug sourcing activities. So we're talking about sourcing comparator or approved standard of care and combination therapies as an additional task to their core responsibilities, taking care of their clinical trial patients. So the key learning objectives that our panel will be discussing today. We're going to look at trends we're seeing from a site's perspective with regards to the commercial drug sourcing for open label clinical trials that they're participating in. We'll provide insights into the financial burden that sites face when they're asked by sponsors to source medications for reimbursement. And we'll summarise ways that both sponsors and sites can set things up to allow elimination of overage and provide an easy site and patient-centric process for sourcing of medications. So in terms of trends that we're seeing as it relates to drug sourcing from a site's perspective, a couple of years ago, Myonexx launched a clinical trial prescription service in the US and Canada, CTRX. Really successful program led by Samit Bhatt on the panel today. It's essentially a mechanism to allow for any commercial drug to be ordered by the sites real time as patients are recruited into the trial, kind of like an insurance card for clinical trials. And Summit will provide an overview towards the end of the session. So when MyNext launched the service, quite honestly, we were mainly focused on the sponsor benefits as our direct clients. So things like access to REMS products, completely eliminating the typical 30% comparator overage you see in a centralized model that saves millions of dollars in a high-value oncology trials. No packaging or labeling needed, no expensive cold chain courier costs, and also the direct-to-patient or nurse delivery aspect to support the growing decentralized trial models. However, since launching the service, and as we run more and more studies, training over 100 sites and interacting with sites pharmacists, what's become more and more apparent to us is actually how CTRX provides other major benefits for the sites themselves that we never originally anticipated as a supplies-focused organization. So things like reducing a site's burden of financing and invoicing. Sites have to manage all kinds of activities related to the operation of a trial. From a cash flow perspective, being asked by sponsors to source and finance expensive comparators is an area we've learned a lot about in the last couple of years. Also, the patient's recruitment impact. In April, the FDA published draft guidance on diversity plans to improve the enrollment of participants from underrepresented racial and ethnic populations in clinical trials. As this relates to drug sourcing, we'll pose some questions as how this impacts patient recruitment. What happens when a patient A has insurance that will cover standard of care costs in line with the Affordable Care Act versus patient B who might not have any insurance at all? Can patient B be recruited into the trial? Is it fair for a sponsor to cover the costs for patient B versus patient A who might have to outlay co-pays as part of their insurance plan? So as mentioned, we have a really great panel today. Samit, Todd and Mary will share their experiences as it relates to these trends. You'll first hear from Todd Lukritz. Todd is responsible for our CTRX prescription service in North America, and he spent nearly 20 years as a pharmacist at the Mayo Clinic and has some really great insights. Mary Vesey has spent a significant amount of her career at MD Anderson as well as other institutions. And Mary will discuss the challenges that sites are facing as it relates to financing in clinical trials, in particular when sponsors ask them to support non-core activities like the sourcing of co-medications. And finally, Samit Bhatt, a pharmacist and key member of MyNext's leadership team. Samit will provide a high-level summary of our CTRX sourcing solution, how it works, and how adopting this supplies model can benefit sites, patients, and sponsors alike. As Lisa mentioned, please send questions as we go via the Q&A box. At the end of the session, we'll try to address as many as we can in the remaining time. We can also follow up with details if we miss any. So Todd, please kick us off.
Thanks, Tom. The clinical trial landscape is rapidly evolving. Trials are becoming increasingly complex, and the utilization of comparator medications in protocols is increasing. This trend can prove to be challenging for all parties involved in the trial, from the clinical trial sites, the sponsors, and ultimately the patients. Today, I will discuss some of the issues surrounding site sourcing of comparator medications, which include procurement challenges encountered, site staffing challenges. I'll discuss a real-world example from a trial site. I will provide some insight into how this impacts patients. And finally, I'll hand the presentation over to Mary, who will provide insights into the challenges encountered by sites invoicing for comparator medications. As a former leader in an IDS pharmacy, I am very aware of the issues encountered by sites sourcing comparator medications. Many times, the institutional formulary can be a roadblock to procurement of comparator medications. What I mean by this is some sites have formularies that are very restrictive, which means certain medications which are non-formulary will be impossible to procure without formulary approval. The internal process required to obtain formulary approval is a lengthy process, which certainly could impact tight study execution timelines. Then, some sites have internal policies that prohibit procurement of standard of care comparator or ancillary medications for a trial. They just may not allow it. Then there's issues with quantity forecasting. It's very difficult, not only for sponsors, for sure, but for sites to forecast how much of a medication should you order for a trial? What's the cadence? How many patients are going to enroll in the trial? That makes it very difficult for sites to predict all of these issues. Then there's the issue with limited distribution or LDD medication access. For those of you that don't know, LDD medications are typically defined as medications that are utilized to treat a complex or rare medical condition. And what makes these medications unique is that they're typically available only through a very small chosen network of pharmacies. Additionally, these medications can be very expensive to procure. Examples: palbociclib, cabozantinib, and abiraterone are examples of medications that are limited distribution drugs or LDD meds. Finally, there's REMS medications, which stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategies. These are medications that are governed by an FDA-mandated program for medications that have serious safety concerns to ensure that the benefits of the medication outweigh the risks. REMS programs require the dispensing pharmacies to be enrolled in the program before they can even procure the medication, and pharmacies are not always enrolled in every REMS medication program, which could limit their ability to procure these medications. Examples: lenalidomide, thalidomide, and pomalidomide are examples of medications that reside within this class. And if a site isn't enrolled in this, it's going to be impossible for them to obtain these medications. There's site staffing challenges. This 2016 study showed that Johns Hopkins University Research Pharmacy managed 550 clinical protocols at their site and had 11 full-time pharmacists and 4 full-time technicians to manage this portfolio. This number has only increased for many sites, and adding tasks such as procurement of comparator medications only increases the burden on an ever thinly stretched staffing levels in an IDS pharmacy. Large academic medical centers typically have hundreds of clinical trials in their portfolio. Sites lack adequate staffing levels for the trials they are managing. I mentioned the Johns Hopkins University study from 2016, but a more recent IDS listserv survey conducted in 2020 revealed that the number of clinical trials per pharmacist FTE was around 45, and for technicians, that number was closer to 100. Trial requirements can be very complex, requiring significant staff effort during the trial lifecycle, from IP management, monitoring visits, audits, queries, dispensing, and compounding. Well, the number of trials that have comparator medications in the protocol has been increasing over the past few years, and procurement of comparator medications actually requires extra effort by sites to manage due to forecasting quantities, managing inventory, and invoicing. Due to these complexities and the number of studies that sites maintain, if this continues to grow, additional FTE support would become inevitable to manage inventory sourced by sites for clinical trials. And I can tell you from an former IDS leader, Given the challenges that are encountered when requesting FTE support, most IDS leaders would rather deploy an FTE in a more clinical role with helping sites operationalize and set up clinical trials than adding an FTE for procurement only. Finally, there's no system management in place for comparator sourcing, meaning that the entire process is manual, which leads to inherent inefficiencies. Here's an example from a site. So this particular site lacked access to most LDD medications. Additionally, the site did not have an on-site specialty pharmacy. So the site leadership decided they would not permit the IDS pharmacy to procure and invoice sponsors for comparator standard of care medications. So basically, the site would tell the sponsor if they could not procure and provide all medications, the site would turn down the study. So on average, 15 to 20% of potential sponsored trials were turned away simply due to the inability to procure comparator medications. Let's not forget the patient perspective in all of this. Obtaining commercial medications required for clinical protocols can be burdensome for patients. Comparator or ancillary medications used in clinical trials are very often subject to patient's insurance contract, which means they're subject to copays, out-of-pocket requirements, annual maximums. Additionally, LDD or comparator medications are not easy to procure, and actually, if obtained through a patient's commercial insurance, require a prior authorization be obtained from the insurance carrier prior to utilization or ordering of that medication. This process is not easy, and it's very difficult to manage. Historically, it's a lengthy process, requires several pieces of paperwork to be completed, and on average, the number of days it takes from the time all of the paperwork is completed and submitted to the insurance carrier is around 2 to 14 days to receive a response back from the insurance carrier. And that's just to get a response. That does not mean that the insurance carrier is actually going to approve the medication. Because of this, these requirements actually, if a study has tight timelines from randomization to when the patient is actually enrolled in the trial, if the prior authorization isn't in place, this could adversely affect the patient's ability to enroll. Finally, there's copay requirements. Copay requirements for comparator medication, if are subject to patients' copay requirements, can be really high for high-priced medications. And many of the limited distribution medications are high-priced medications. So if you think about that, if you have one patient who has really good insurance or is able to fund the medication through paying cash, and you have another patient that does not have great insurance, this actually could lead to selecting out patients who only have good insurance who are willing to participate in the trial. Could this impact SKU data in some way? Certainly, I think the possibility for that scenario exists. Now I'm going to hand the presentation over to Mary, who will discuss the financial challenges encountered by sites when sourcing comparator and ancillary medications for trials. Mary?
Thank you, Todd, for the summary of pharmacy challenges facing sites and sponsors participating in clinical trials. Based on my 16 years of working closely with principal investigators, investigational pharmacy, and our patients at a large academic medical center, I can relate to the challenges you presented today. In addition to the pharmacy challenges, sites face financial management challenges like invoicing. This is also known as sponsor billing. I will summarize these challenges during my presentation today. However, let me start off by providing an overview of the sponsor's responsibility. Sponsors are responsible for covering the costs associated with a clinical trial, especially if it's their clinical trial and they are the author of that trial. Some of the types of costs that they will traditionally cover and should be covering is the salary associated with the study team. That includes the principal investigator, the research nurse, the study coordinator, and whoever else may be involved in that particular trial and needed to fulfill the study requirements. Maybe you need a content expert for that particular trial. They are also involved and should be covering the non-covered patient care charges, those items and services that we cannot bill out to insurance, that is statutorily excluded from coverage by insurance carriers, to include those drugs and biologics that Todd talked about today. They're also responsible for supplies and other consumables, as well as the overhead costs associated with a particular organization, and that will vary from organization to organization or from site to site. Sponsors are also required to pay for the fulfillment of those study requirements. So as the study milestones are met and the study monitor signs off, those payments should be coming through to those particular sites. And there are also financial and pharmacy leadership challenges that are occurring throughout each of the trials and are sometimes unique depending on that particular trial. When a study milestone is met, the study site must issue an invoice to the sponsor. That particular invoice does two things. It actually allows the site to recognize the revenue associated with that particular study milestone payment into their general ledger system. It also informs the sponsor that a milestone payment has been met and payment should be rendered to that particular site. Sites experience some challenges along the way when waiting for that particular payment from a sponsor. The sponsor may reject the invoice because of a misunderstanding in the payment terms or the actual misunderstanding of contractual language. And I can tell you from my 16 years of experience at a large academic medical center, this happened more often than we'd like. There were misunderstandings about contract language, and so it's important to get that information smoothed out before that actual contract is signed. And that way everyone understands not only the payment terms, but also the language that is there driving those payment terms as well. The sponsor sometimes does not remit a full payment. This may be due to the study monitor seeing that there are some unresolved data issues during their study visit, or the actual contract may have payment terms that denotes holdbacks until the study has completed certain phases. Some sites do not go back and invoice for these holdbacks or these unresolved issues that are occurring, and thus they are leaving their revenue that they're generated on the table and providing free services to that particular study sponsor. Study sponsors sometimes remit payment for multiple studies on one payment or one check, sometimes with no remittance advice to explain how to allocate that particular payment for these studies. This provides the financial team the inability to reconcile payments received. The financial team is unable to post the payment to the appropriate study account, and they are unable to close the study in a timely manner due to these discrepancies. Study sites are often plagued with long delays in payments received from study sponsors. This actually places a financial burden on the principal investigator or the study site because they are having to float those expenses and finance the study with no revenue to offset those expenses associated with that trial. I can tell you from my years of experience that time frame can be up to 120 plus days. Sponsors also tend to want to place large dollar procedures like scans or biopsies as invoiceable items in the study budget. This actually reduces the per patient care cost associated with the study milestone, but it also puts a tremendous burden on a study site to remember to invoice for each of these services and ensure that those invoices are submitted to the sponsor in a timely manner. Sites experience tremendous issues around transparency. They are unable to see unpaid items and services, and they have an inability to see unbilled items and services, especially if they don't have a CTMS or a clinical trials management systems that they have that is fully functional and is working in their best interest. We also have, this actually provides sites with floating the financial burden associated with that particular study. Sites leave unearned revenue with the sponsor, resulting in free research services. And again, the PI and the site must bear the burden of covering for those uncollected revenue amounts. Study revisions or modifications also add to the challenges experienced by a site, especially from a financial perspective. Study sites must effectively incorporate these changes into the study. They must manage sometimes patients on varying versions of a study, and oftentimes have to manage varying milestone payments depending on the severity of the change or within that particular revision. And they also must invoice for services rendered before the study modification and ensuring that that information is appropriately reconciled. Now that I've discussed some of the invoicing challenges, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sumit to talk to you about some possible solutions. Sumit?
Thank you, Mary. So as Todd and Mary mentioned, these are real problems with real burdens on clinical trial sites, sponsors, and patients. How can we eliminate these challenges Todd and Mary discussed? I'm going to pause here and go through some real examples where these challenges Todd and Mary highlighted could have happened. For example, in regard to challenges of site sourcing, how can we support a sponsor and the site to ensure there's unimpeded access to products like lenalidomide or palbociclib for clinical trial participants, which are highly restricted products? Sponsors cannot buy these products wholesale due to its limited distribution status and REMS requirements, and oftentimes there are site challenges obtaining the drug. This would result in the trial not happening, and we have solved for these types of situations through a central specialty pharmacy setup within our clinical trial pharmacy solutions, or CTRX, which I'll talk about a little later. Even if the site could obtain the product, they would have to buy multiple strengths up front to account for the varying dosing, which would cost tens of thousands of dollars, and then have to wait to get paid back by the sponsor manually, which could take up to 120 days or longer, like Mary mentioned. And then if the patients do not enroll, it would result in tremendous waste for the sponsor and potentially unreimbursed costs to the site. A major academic medical center lost $250,000 in a single year due to unreimbursed medication procured for sponsors. And that particular site no longer procures medication or commercial medications for sponsors any longer. So in regard to patient access, for example, how do you make patient access more convenient for clinical trial participants? We supported a study where the sponsor needed 2 brands of insulin for diabetic patients. It was difficult for clinical sites to store sponsor-supplied insulin, nor did the sponsor want to purchase bulk supply up front, which would have resulted in wasted product and increased cost, as you do not know the dosing for patients with insulin up front, nor what brand the patient would be randomized to. We provided a pharmacy network for the patients to pick up their insulin. Investigator sites and sponsors were happy as their patients did not have to travel back to the site and pick up medication needed for the clinical trial. Sites did not have to procure multiple packs up front, nor did the sponsor have to manage inventory, manage expiry, or manage forecasting for the trial. Patients obtained insulin they were prescribed in the protocol on demand from a local pharmacy. And then coming up, I'm going to discuss how CTRX works. When we originally launched the service in 2020, our intention was to help sponsors eliminate waste, provide patient pharmacy options, and improve access. However, we have quickly realized the process helps sites in regard to revenue cycle management and procurement challenges that Todd and Mary discussed. So in North America, investigators and patients obtain medications through MyNexus pharmacy network By submitting a prescription to the pharmacy along with using our clinical trial prescription card or our CTRX pharmacy benefit card that pharmacies commonly use, and it works just like an insurance card, but it's for clinical trials. The pharmacies will be reimbursed by MyNex on behalf of sponsors, and claims for medications dispensed to clinical trial participants will be processed real time when the pharmacy uses a CTRX pharmacy card. The CTRX pharmacy card, as I just stated, works just like an insurance card, and there are no financial costs to the patient as it is fully sponsor funded. If the sponsors elect to fully pay for the protocol medications, we believe it can eliminate the financial burdens on patients and impact patient recruitment and improve that. So in the first step of the trial, as you can see, MyNex will determine for the sponsors and investigators where the medications needed for the trials can be accessed. The CTRX card can also be utilized at site, retail, and specialty pharmacies, which can use the CTRX card for more efficient claims processing versus a hospital research pharmacy purchasing the product, even if they can with the burdens Todd mentioned, and having the invoicing challenges Mary discussed. And this process would help with that. There are 70,000 plus pharmacies where the CTRX card can be accepted. For example, medications like lenalidomide can only be dispensed by certain pharmacies, whereas medications like insulin can be obtained at virtually any chain or independent pharmacy. Once the setup for the trial is established, the investigator will write the prescriptions per the protocol for the clinical trial patients and submit them to the pharmacy along with the CTRX pharmacy card. This on-demand process eliminates the need for sponsors to buy all of the product in bulk, nor require the site to purchase the product up front and have the challenges of procuring, storing, invoicing, and waiting for sponsor reimbursement. In addition, this on-demand aspect eliminates waste for the sponsor as medications are dispensed on demand from pharmacies that stock and store these type of medications. The burden on sites to buy and wait to get paid back that Mary talked about goes away through this process. And all of the dispensations by pharmacies are recorded in a real-time data portal at a clinical trial subject number level to capture dispensing and costs for sponsors. Sponsors are not financially liable for medications not dispensed to patients through this process. And through this process, sites will never have unreimbursed drug, nor be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars for studies involving for example, specialty medications. We're currently providing sponsors this service here in the US, but we will also be offering central and local pharmacy services in Europe as these challenges around access waste and the site operational burdens around procurement exist globally. So to recap, the service provides benefits for all stakeholders in the clinical trial, sponsors, sites, and patients. Sponsors have an effective method for sites and patients to obtain medications they need per the protocol without waste. Patients do not have any financial burden or responsibility with this process, as sponsors pay for medications dispensed on demand through this service. Patients have more options for access. Sites do not have to procure expensive commercial medications up front and wait to get paid back from the sponsor. And our CTRX pharmacy card can be utilized by site, outpatient, retail, and specialty pharmacies, and claims can be processed real time. We are effectively impacting the challenges Todd mentioned around site sourcing and Mary's challenges around invoicing for services and products sites purchase for sponsor studies. At MyNex, we are continuing to improve how we can make the clinical trial drug supply process a smoother one for all stakeholders and keeping sites, patients, and sponsors happy.
Thank you, Samit. So we can move into questions now. So if you're yet to ask your question, please do so now. And I shall try to sort through them all and direct them to our panel.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Samit, Todd, and Mary. We are now ready for the Q&A. Before we get started on the session, I would like to remind the audience how to submit questions. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found directly below the video player. And let me now hand this over to Tom Gregson, who's going to manage the Q&A for today. Tom?
Thank you, Lisa. So just working through these questions here, and I will attempt to direct them to the members of our panel. So first question we have here, and maybe Sumit, this is a good one for you. Can you talk us through an example of this program, so CTRX being successful? And there's also another question which is kind of similar. What are common medications that work best for CTRX?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great questions. In terms of examples, we have numerous studies and sponsors we're supporting. A couple of examples are hard to access products. For example, we have a study where sponsors unable to access wholesale lenalidomide, and they need an easy way for sites to be able to procure that for patients participating in that is a limited distribution product and a REMS requirement around it. It's really expensive. A cycle is about $20,000+, and there's varying dosing. So patients that need to titrate down, for example, instead of the traditional route in regards to that in the States, it's easier to order on demand. Products like that are palbociclib and other product, osimertinib, various different oncology products, but also, there's non-specialty or non-expensive products that patients just need as part of their protocol that they obtain at their local pharmacy. So we've had examples where patients need an adjunct medication like a statin medicine that the sponsor wants to pay and provide. And so patients would go with their pharmacy card that's assigned to them to their local pharmacy that they're already used to going to, getting all their other medications. If you think about some of the patient populations, they're polypharmacy type patients with multiple medications they're already getting. And this would be another medicine that would be prescribed as part of the protocol that they would take as part of their trial, and be a convenient way for them to access that medicine without having to travel back to the site. Common medications, so, we're talking about open label studies here, and, any commercially available medication on the market, sponsors are able to access and provide for their clinical trial participants through the service.
Thank you, Sumit. So I'll try and stick to a couple more service line related questions, and then before we get into the finance, insurance ones, and also some site ones coming through. So another service line related question, is labeling of medications needed? So maybe Sumit or Todd, you want to take that one?
Yeah, in terms of labeling requirements, it's a sponsor. We work closely with the sponsor in the protocol. Labeling generally is not required unless that drug meets certain requirements that the sponsor is filing with the FDA. But through a pharmacy, generally labeling is not required for the product. And specifically, if you're referencing that cautionary statement, it really depends on the product and how it's viewed in the protocol. And if it is required, it is something pharmacies can do on demand. But generally, more common of it, it's one, it's not part of the requirement, and two, it's not required it's not required based on the sponsor protocol.
Thank you. Another one in service line is, do you present the service to sites? How many sites have you trained? Todd, maybe you want to take this one?
Sure. So right now we don't really offer the service to sites per se. We work more with the sponsors on these. And what was the second part of the question, Tom?
How many sites have you trained?
Sure. We've probably trained in Summit, you can back me up on this, probably upwards of 100+ sites across the country. It might even be more. I might be forgetting a few, but quite a few sites have already been trained on this process.
Yeah, definitely. The kind of site mix, it varies from academic medical centers to community providers because of the type of therapeutic categories we cover. It varies, and we have broad geographic coverage as well. And yeah, it is over 100+ some sites.
Perfect, thank you. Let's if you could maybe answer this one as well. Can this service support direct to patient? So yeah, maybe just if you could talk through, maybe Sumit, if you could talk through the how that would work for direct to patient deliveries.
Yes, absolutely. So direct to patient is something we do offer and provide. currently. Pharmacies are the pharmacies that are in our network and we're contracted with to provide centralized pharmacy services are used to providing direct-to-patient shipments, and it would meet your protocol requirements around storage and facilitating the movement of your product from the pharmacy to the patient directly. There's procedures in place in terms of confirming delivery with the patients, and ensuring that the patient gets the medicine on time in the shipping requirements that sponsors often require.
Another question here, Summit, coming through. Is the CTRX card also to be used by the institution pharmacy to procure blinded comparator?
Yeah, blinded comparator, it depends on the blinded setup. Typically today we support open label studies, but depending on that procedure, it would have to be a study we'd have to look at. But currently we support open label studies in the market for sponsors.
Okay. And we have, can you also support non-drug products, for instance, food supplements?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad somebody asked that. I think it's possible if products need to be shipped from a pharmacy. I guess it depends on the type of food supplement. It's not something we've currently have done, but it'd have to be something we'd have to look at in terms of what type of supplement it is and is it prescription based or not, and look into that individually. But other types of non-drug products, so like supplies, for example, diabetes test strips, are things that we have supported, for example. So it's not just drug. There can be things outside of drug as well in terms of certain supplies that pharmacies can provide.
Okay, perfect. We have some site-related questions, more site-related questions. How do sites currently track what drugs they order? So I guess this is more a question around, when this type of service isn't being used and they're being asked by sponsors to procure comparators, how are those sites currently tracking that? Maybe this is a good one for Todd.
To be honest with you, in my former life, I really didn't have a good way to track all of the comparator meds we were ordering. It was basically project or trial specific. So how I used to do it was we would procure what we needed to procure. We would send the invoice to finance, and we basically had a folder. It wasn't kept electronically. We had a folder with all the invoices, and then at the end of the month, we would make sure that the invoices were paid. So it was a lot of burden on my staff, to track down, especially with the number of trials we had, to keep all of this straight. It got a little confusing. So, I really didn't have a great way to do it, but that's how we did it.
Okay. And I guess that's quite a good segue into this next question someone else has asked, which is, how does a site place an order? I don't know if Todd, you want to go with that, or Summit maybe?
Summit, do you want to take that one?
Yeah.
On how we're processed?
Sure. Yeah, I can start with the time if I miss anything. It would be a normal prescription-based process. So investigators are already used to writing prescriptions for medications, whether sponsors in case are having investigators use patient insurance. Instead, they'd use our CTRX sponsor-funded card, and they would write the script and send it to the pharmacy that we would instruct them to, whether the local site pharmacy or central pharmacy, depending on how we set the protocol up with the sponsor.
And then also related to the site, how does the CTRX process incorporate into electronic patient health records?
I can answer that. So for some electronic medical records, what I'm used to is Epic, but I know Cerner has it. What we've done, or what I did in my former life, is, you can still use the electronic medical record to submit the prescription to whichever pharmacy is set up for the project. And you can submit the prescription the normal way, but then you provide the pharmacy the card information. Now, we actually had a place in my former life in Epic. We had a spot where we could put in processing information for the prescription to send to the pharmacy to fill it. So, like the BIN, PCN, group number, all the processing information would go directly into the electronic prescription and then submitted to the pharmacy.
Thank you, Todd. So I'm just trying to sort through these questions now. I think we'll maybe pivot to some more finance or insurance-based questions. So probably, Mary, questions for you here. Can sponsors cover co-pays? You want to take that one?
Sure. Great question. It really, I hate to answer a question with another question or a statement such as it depends, but it really depends on the organization and if the organization is participating in that Medicare program, i.e. receiving monies from a federal agency such as Medicare. So if that is the case and you are participating in the Medicare program, the answer would be no, because you want to make sure that you're treating all your patients the same and you're allowing those patients who are not participating in a clinical trial to actually allow to have their insurance be covering, just like you're doing with your patients that are participating in a clinical trial. So you want to focus on keeping all the treating all the patients the same, because Medicare really wants to have the cheapest priced out there, and they want to have their beneficiaries be afforded the exact same luxuries everyone else is, regardless if they're participating in a clinical trial or not. So my recommendation would be to kind of stay away from that, because that is pretty slippery slope, because most organizations are participating in some sort of Medicare program. That's the extent of my answer right now. Thanks.
And Mary, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead, Sumit.
Yeah, so to expand on that, Mary, I guess, co-pays is one thing, but if a sponsor, let's say, was doing a study with the standard of care treatment, and they elected not to pay for fully funded or provided for free, essentially, for patients, and, decided to use insurance, is there, can sponsors support patients that meet financial need requirements and are unable to access the medicine because of their other insurance status? So in that case, can sponsors provide coverage?
Another great question. Thanks, Sumit. The answer is, again, this is very similar to what I gave before. It really depends on whether the organization is participating in that Medicare program, because keep in mind, Medicare wants all of their patients, regardless of they're participating in a clinical trial or not, to receive the same benefits as everyone else. And so I think you would have to really take a careful look at that organization and see if they're participating in the Medicare program. My recommendation would be that the sponsor cover all of the patients, not just those patients that are having some financial need there, that the sponsor would actually cover all of the patients associated with that clinical trial.
Maybe that's actually the next question here as well. Why would sponsors fully elect to pay for the medication?
Well, because patients have varying insurances. One insurance does not fit all. And while the Affordable Care Act did provide us more assurances that patients can participate in a clinical trial, it's not forcing insurance companies to cover costs associated with a clinical trial. Drugs is one of the most expensive things that a patient will face when participating in a clinical trial. And so I think it would be prudent for a sponsor to really weigh that option and look to see, is that really going to help me to get patients to actually consent to the study because it's more financially affordable for them, or is it going to help them stay retained? Because oftentimes in my 16 years of experience at a large academic medical center, I saw that patients were enrolled in a study, but because of financial issues, maybe changes in their insurance during the course of that study, or just the fact that they couldn't financially afford to stay on the study, they would opt to actually get off of that particular study and do conventional care instead. And so then a sponsor is faced with retention issues associated with that particular trial. So I think that she should weigh all those options, because not only will it impact patient recruitment in a positive way, but it would also impact that retention and allow those sponsors to gather the data that they're seeking to move that study to market, or that drug to market.
Absolutely. Really interesting answer, Mary. Thank you so much. So I know we're close to time. Probably got time for one more question. We have here, do you have plans to make this service global? So, I mean, as the resident European, I will take this on, because obviously CTRX is in North America right now, and yes, the answer is yes. From Mynex perspective, we have been working for the last year or so to establish a central pharmacy network within Europe. Obviously, the mechanics of how that work is very different to how it works in the US, being lots of small markets rather than one big one. But yeah, we're really excited to launch this. We've invested a significant amount of time and effort into making this ready for our clients. So I can't say too much more, because I know my marketing team might be listening, and there is a planned launch in the very near future. So yeah, we're really excited to launch that very soon, and yeah, happy to share more information on it and details post-launch. So I think with that, just checking any last questions. No more questions have come through. So thank you very much for joining this session today. Really appreciate it. And Lisa, if I can hand back to you to close everything out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you, Sumit, Mary, and Todd, for your insights. It was excellent Q&A. And the audience, thank you so much for attending and for participating in today's event. And I'd like to thank our sponsor, Mynex, for making today's educational webcast possible. We would like to ask everyone in the audience to now participate in a brief survey, and that survey will populate for you automatically after the presentation is ended. You will also receive an email alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay, and we invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. We will see you next time. Take care.